All right, hello everyone, and welcome back. This is really exciting because we're finally diving into the actual production of the typewriter here. For this first actual production chapter, what we're going to be doing is working on the blockout. And essentially what we're going to be doing by diving into this is we're going to be blocking out some of the key shapes and breaking this down just so that everything sort of has a representation, like a proper cylinder that is the right size. All the connection pieces have like a rough shape for them, and everything's kind of lined up and sorted out, so that when we do want to start working on the more detailed version, we can just sort of take apart pieces, work on the detailed version, and then move on to the next piece. And that way we just sort of know ahead of time that everything's going to fit together, and it's just going to make things go a lot smoother. I think a lot of the times, when you're working on something like this, it can kind of be overlooked, but the blockout, if you were to ask me, for this specific project would probably be actually the most difficult piece. Most people would assume that something like a blockout is really easy, but for this is, to me at least, the most intimidating. And the reason I say that is because, I don't know, say we can go back to this guy, we look at this, we know exactly what it is, so then finding the tools and finding the techniques to make it is pretty straightforward. But once we start looking at, something like the interiors of here, and we don't really know how everything's connected, there's no techniques exactly to figure out how we are going to make that, because we don't know exactly what it is and how it all slots together. So in this blockout phase, we're kind of going into it partially blind and going to figure out how everything here works. Now, one technique that I do when working on pieces like this, just to understand it better, is break things down by their parts. So what I did here was I copied a bunch of these images, I brought them into Photoshop, and I said, okay, I'm going to add color to places that are all the same. So all the red is one big hunk of metal, and then I'm dividing up these other pieces attached by things that sort of group together naturally, like this front piece. These the yellow is all the underneath the key part. Obviously the keys are all one piece, the ruler and stuff like that, they're all given their own category. And this way I can say, let's start with the big metal casing, and then we can start adding the pieces on and sort of fitting them into each other. I'm going to be honest, I've done quite a bit of research on these typewriters, but I don't fully understand how they work. So I'm not expecting to have an exact one-to-one functional replica of how this works, but if I can get this visually to match it, I'm happy with that. So that's what we're going to be doing here. Another very important part, I can't stress this enough, is when you're doing a blockout, make sure you get tons and tons of reference. A lot of this is just Google searching, but I found out if you go on eBay for actual physical items that you can find, eBay is really good for reference, because if you think about it, what people are trying to do is they're trying to sell you something. So they want to show that, hey, this is in good condition. This is, all the different angles. They want to, like, they're selling you something. So they're trying to make it look as good as possible. So I found these two rows here actually on eBay. So we got some nice HD images. I really like how it actually showed off some good side shots, which is super helpful for something like this. And this typewriter actually had this like weird button extension on it that I've never seen before that I think would be a lot of fun to add. It extends to the back here. And yeah, I'm getting all these like underneath views. This is a bit different than the one we're going to be making, but it gave me some inspiration for pieces that we could add. And then this is more like the one that we actually are going to be making. And once again, since this is from a seller, they have some like really detailed sort of pictures of how all this stuff works. And like I said, I'll be including all this for you guys if you want to go check it out. But yeah, definitely a good exercise is to break things up into pieces and try and have as good of an understanding as you can going into this, because like I said, to each their own. This is different for everyone, but for me personally, this is definitely the most intimidating part of the project, because as soon as I know how everything lines up, we can just sort of do that workflow that I showed you before, and it becomes really quickly. Or not really quickly, because this will realistically take a while, but at least it won't cause any stress or any confusion or anything like that. So what we're going to do is we can actually dive into Maya now. It's going to double check that this audio is recording. Good. And I've already been sort of messing with some of the shapes. I was just sort of playing around with it a little bit. So one of the most important things to do is make sure that you kind of know the scale of what you're working with. So what I did was, eBay was also really good for this. I was online and I found out the dimensions for just kind of like one of the typewriters I was looking at. I think it was for this guy here, which is the one that we're going to be recreating for the most part. This has some differences on the side, but it's like 99% to what we're making, and we have the dimensions for it. So what we can do is, this is in inches. My myosine and probably the majority of your myosines are going to be in centimeters. So we can grab a good old Google tab and do a inches to centimeters. Right, so 20 is 50.8 centimeters. So let's just get a box in here. So polycube width would be 50.8. I'll just do this on the other screen. 14. So 14 inches comes out to 35.56. And then 10 inches is going to come out to 25.4. So I'm just slotting these in to the width, height, and depth. Based on this, I don't know exactly which way it's supposed to be facing, but let's just, keep our reference in mind and what kind of makes the most sense here. So I'm just going to assume that it's rotated this way. That, for the most part, kind of looks like the dimensions of something like this. If we cut this and have the keyboard sticking out. So I'm going to be going based on this, and we're going to be sort of working from there. We're trying to make this as realistic as possible, so using those measurements are important. But I think more or less, just based on the shape of it, I can just sort of use that as a guideline, because I'm not exactly sure if they're measuring from end to end or from here, like one leg to the other leg, because it kind of seems like that. So yeah, this is just a rough estimate of how things are going to be, and we can build upon that. So what I'm going to do now that we have our rough shape in is I'm going to hit D. D is going to be moving our pivot, holding V so that we can vertex snap. And I'm just going to slide this down to the bottom here, to our bottom vert, just so we have our gizmo aligned to the bottom. And I'm going to be doing this a lot, so I'll be explaining these techniques in depth at the beginning, but then we're going to become very comfortable with them, and we're going to start to automate it quite a bit. So D to get into pivot mode, holding V to snap it, and just pressing D again to get out. And then another way of snapping is based on the grid, so these grid points here. And if we hold X, we can snap upon the grid. So since we moved our pivot to the bottom, we can hold X and just drag up and snap our box to be flush with the bottom of the grid. So that's just a quick way to set this up. And from here, let's start getting in our main shapes. I'm going to try and just find a decent reference to sort of keep in the corner for now, and then as we go along, we'll have to be looking at more reference, but this is just for the basic shape for now. All right, so we have 4 legs. We have a big opening. The opening goes into the top, but this is sort of squared off on the sides. So let's start with the legs on this guy. So like I said, this is just a block out, so we're not going into detail, and what we're doing is we're not making things essentially, they're not going to be working super well, so I don't have to worry about sewing anything together or welding my verts or anything like that. So I'm literally just going to go to polygon primitive cylinder, scale this guy up. I'm not worried about edge count or anything like that either. Like 20, sure, like it's quite a bit, but it's fine for this. And then I'm just going to scale this down, and we can just start to get things in position. So we can go into our verts, and just like before, holding V is to snap things based on verts. So holding V, I can drag this down and just snap it to this end, and holding V, I can snap this to this end, and we can just try and accurately get the scale of all of this correct. So I'm just sort of trying to mimic this leg that's kind of bulging out there a little bit. It kind of seems more or less about this size, but it also seems like this box has a couple other things going on with it than we have currently set up. if I remember correctly, if I can find a good side shot, yeah, this thing is definitely raised up a little bit. So we should factor that in before we get too far. It seems like I'm just hitting space to go into multi-view and then space again to go into side. It seems like I can raise this up about a decent amount, about this high. Seems appropriate. And of course we can always adjust this later. It's the whole point of the block out phase. So we got that set up, and just based on this profile shot, it seems like this is a bit skinnier, but it gets wider at the bottom quite a bit once we get down to the feet. So what I'm going to do is, since we don't actually have any feet, I'm going to select these verts on the bottom and snap them up here. Center our pivot, freeze transformations, and delete history just to reset everything and make it easier to work with. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate this guy and just put him down here for now, just so we have another cylinder we can easily grab in a second. But what I want to do is you can see this sort of tapers out a little bit and then turns into legs, so I just want to make sure I have that correct taper set up. So if we go and hit Control Shift X, we get our multi-cut tool, and this is going to be super useful. We can just cut up our mesh like so, or if we hold Control on the mesh, we can do a ring, a perfect ring all the way around. So that's really useful, and that's exactly how we're going to be setting this up. So I'm just going to click about here. I'm just going to mimic that that size there, and then from here we can see if we should make this skinnier or make this wider, and I think we should make this top part a bit narrower, like so, and that's starting to match it a little bit more. Another thing I want to do is just to make sure this is totally level, is I'm going to center the pivot, and holding V I can snap just based on certain axes, right? So I'm going to hold V and snap this on the x-axis just to this point, and on the z-axis to this point here, just to make sure it's perfectly aligned in the corner, and then we can play with it a bit afterwards. I just want to make sure things are super easy to work with. Excuse me. And then we got to make sure that this is lined up with that as well. So holding V, I'm just snapping to the center vert on the bottom here. Boom. Cool. So just to give this a bit more accuracy, I'm just going to select this edge ring by double clicking and hitting Control B to bevel. Control B might not be set up by default, so if you're wondering how else to bevel in the modeling toolkit, the bevel button is just right here. So now we sort of have this tapered off little stump here. It definitely appears like it goes hollow up, but we don't need to worry about that in something like a block out. This is just to get sort of the distance of everything accurate. So let's continue by getting this foot here. I'm going to make this quite a bit smaller. And all we have to worry about for this is making sure the distance from the bottom to the top is accurate. So selecting the verts on the top and holding V to snap based on verts, we can get it perfectly aligned with this. And then selecting the verts on the bottom, we can hit or hold X rather, and make sure it's perfectly level with the grid, because those are our two main points of snapping. So by looking at this, I'm starting to feel like our scale is a little bit off. One of the biggest things is I think that I can scale this out a little bit and bring it down a little bit as well. And if we're bringing that down, we got to bring this face down to match it. And then from here, we can sort of manipulate the feet a little bit more and just realign this. It definitely seems like it just gets wider at the bottom. So we can just grab these verts, make them a little bit bigger, and then once again Control Shift X to get our cut tool, and holding Control we can just put an edge in the middle and just round it out a little bit more. So we're getting the shape, but I don't think we're very accurately representing the scale, and this is why doing the block out is so important. So For this guy, I'm going to grab the bottom. This definitely just seems, it just seems a bit too tall for this. So let's actually grab these top verts and bring them down. And this is starting to look a bit more like what we're going for. To select this ring, I'm just clicking one vert, holding shift and double clicking the one beside it, and it gets the whole ring. And then we can just sort of drag this back down. This is a good opportunity to talk about how we can also set up our pivots for snapping parts of a mesh like this, like when we're in sub-object mode. So say we just have all these verts, and I want to make this bottom face perfectly level with this top face. I can hit D once again to get our gizmo up, and I can hold V to snap it to the bottom of this face. Hit D again, and now we've moved our pivot for these specific faces to the bottom, and then from here we can just snap that down. So that's a quick way to do that. But now you notice every time I click a vert, my gizmo is just locked where we had it set before. If you just want to reset it, all you have to do is press D again to sort of have your gizmo transform up, and just click off, and it's going to put it back to where it should be. So what I'm going to do is scale this whole thing up a little bit and just adjust the shape of everything just a little bit, just to round it all out. And it seems like we're getting there a little bit more. This seems like it's divided in two. So for now, I'm just trying to get the height of it, and then once we're doing the actual version of it, I can get that extra detail in. But it seems like I can still afford to make this a little bit smaller. A quick way to do that is just moving the pivot down here, D to get it up again, and just vertex snapping it. And I'm just going to scale it down like so. We're going to do the same technique as before, where we move our pivot by pressing D, snapping it, and holding V to snap down to the bottom. From here, of course, we have to match the bottom face, and just put it right here. And it seems like we're starting to get the size of everything a little bit more. What I'm going to actually do now is grab these two objects and shift right click. We can go to combine, and now it's one mesh. We can also go to mesh. Mesh combine will do the exact same thing. I just like to keep things nice and quick if I can. So from here, let's try and set it up so it's a bit more accurate to how it's actually interacting with the main frame here. So it kind of looks like it's cut into the side, which we have, but it also seems like it's about here, like it's level with the end of it. So that's also a quick fix. We already have it level on the x-axis here, but to get it in the position we want, I'm just going to hit D, move our pivot to the point that's furthest on the z-axis, like all the way to the right, and then we can just snap it over, and it's starting to represent the shape that we're going for. I just want to look at it from the front. Yeah, it just sort of has those feet sticking out. I just want to cross-reference a couple of these. So yeah, it's like the furthest to the side, and then the front, it has these larger pieces coming out. So that seems to be how we want it. Yeah, we have this triangular piece coming out directly out of here. Cool. So let's start to mirror this guy around a little bit. I'm just going to reposition on the main reference. Where is it? We're looking at this guy, right? Yep. Okay, so a quick way to get this duplicated all the way around is if we select the face here on the top of everything, we can hit shift right click and go to poke face. And what that does is it adds an X in the middle of our mesh. For those of you who can't see that, you might want to click on or off your wireframe mode here. But basically that's how we would set that up very quickly. And I'm starting to think that I might want to rescale this before I go any further. So I'm actually going to undo that. Just sort of looking at the two of these, there seems like there's a bit of a scale difference. So I'm going to scrunch this up a little bit. And then it seems like it's a bit too tall as well. I feel like this is a bit more accurate, and then the width definitely seems off as well. So the measurements I was looking at, I don't know how accurate they were or what exactly they were measuring, but I'm just going to be using this box for the main sort of like frame of everything, so it's definitely a bit too big before. I'm going to stick with this for now. I'm going to center the pivot and just holding X, center the gizmo to the world, and now we can just reline this up. So snap and putting this in the middle. Just, yeah, snapping it how we had before, and then bringing this down. Cool. Quick and easy. So like I was saying before, we can select face, shift right click, and poke the face. And we do this because it brings up a vert in the middle that we can then put our gizmo to know how to mirror things. So if I hit D and move our pivot there by vertex snapping, we have all these symmetry tools set up from before. So I'm just going to freeze transformations and delete history. And we can just quickly say, boom, let's mirror it over X, and let's mirror it over Z. And really quickly, we just get our legs all the way around. And this is just a faster way of working in general. It's also going to give us a better idea if we have our scale set up. And it still seems like this is a bit smaller in general. So I'm going to unmirror it this way. Delete these edges for now, just by shift clicking and control backspace. We can just sort of push this a little bit more in the front as well. I actually might want to compress a little bit. That's definitely feeling a bit more like what we're going for. So it's a lot of back and forth, but let's just reline this up. Delete this part because we're not going to be using it. Center the pivot on this guy. And snap it back. And this part's like crucial to how everything else is lined up, and that's why I'm just trying to make sure the measurements are as accurate as possible. So once again, poke face, vertex snap our pivot to the center, freeze transformations, delete history, and we can just mirror it over X and mirror it over Z. Cool. So we got that set up pretty quickly, pretty easy, and I'm going to go ahead and delete this X on the top just so it doesn't give us any weird geometry issues later on. So now let's start cutting out this main shape. There are a ton of different ways that we can do this. In fact, I'm not even sure if I want to keep this box at all, just because we're going to have to sort of rebuild everything around it. So let's start off by putting a boolean through it just so we get a clean cut, and then we can sort of work on it from there a little bit more. So I'm going to duplicate this and just sort of scale it out so we have a better view. I'm going to scale this in, and there's other ways to do this, but a boolean is just quick, and it's a good way to sort of get you guys comfortable with all the new tools. So I'm just going to hit the boolean manager, select the first mesh that we're going to be cutting from, the second mesh that's going to be doing the cutting, and just hit new boolean operation. It's going to put a cut through everything. We can just hit delete history in base objects, and now we just have our one mesh that has the boolean cut in it. And it's not going to be perfectly accurate, but we can sort of go in and fix that up later on. And by later on, I mean right now. So let's just isolate this guy by hitting the little icon up here, and we can sort of go through and clean this up a little bit. We want to sort of connect these edges. There's a couple ways to do this. You can hit Control Shift X, and that's going to let you sort of like click and drag, and then right click to sort of close it off. But for me, I have a hotkey set up where I can just select two verts and hit Control 2, which is mapped to my mouse, and it just automatically puts them together. Whatever works for you guys. The cutting tool is just as fast and efficient. I'm just used to using it the other way. So now if we unisolate everything, we can start to sort of get a better feel for the distance between everything. So first of all, this needs to be raised up quite a bit. About that high. This is scaled in significantly, just based on the distance here. And then the top doesn't seem to be too thick, but it does sort of have this sort of ring cut out to it, which is interesting. I also know that the bottom itself is actually hollow, so we're going to have to factor that in at some point. Same with the top. So essentially we're just kind of making the sides more than anything, but I do sort of want to keep this together just for convenience for modeling everything else. So let's sort of start with this setup and go from there. I might even want to cut it off. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-X to go back to my cut tool. We're just going to cut a slice here and cut a slice here, just so we can sort of like cut off this part of the mesh completely and start building this shape a little bit better. So I'm going to select these two rings, and I just want to make them level with each other. So I'm going to go and hit the R key to get into the scaling tool and just shrink it on the axes just to make sure that they're totally level. And from there, what we can do is just select this part of the mesh and hit extract. So I'm going to select everything here, and then holding Control, I can deselect the extra, and now we have the part that we want. So I'm going to hit Shift, right click, and extract faces. So what this just did was, now we have them into two meshes. We have this mesh, and we have the main body mesh. It's just going to make it easier to work with, because when we look at the typewriter itself, this part is kind of like a square that's closed off, but the this is a much better reference to show this off. So the side part is like one piece on its own, because this top part is hollow, the bottom is hollow, the front is a different piece, and there's no back, right? So even though like it comes and it's welded to this part and this triangular piece is all attached, and same around the back, this is kind of like its own isolated part that we can sort of work on and then build everything else from afterwards. So let's go ahead and do just that. First things first, we gotta get the width right. So I'm just gonna actually isolate these pieces isolate these pieces here. So I'm just selecting, shift clicking, and isolating, of course. And let's grab these two edge loops, and let's start to figure out how wide this is supposed to be, just by looking at our reference. It seems like the width is going to be the same as these cylinders that we set up, but I just want to double check. So I don't want to make them too thin. This is a good profile shot for that. So I'm just going to try that. So just holding V, I'm going to snap it to about here, which looks a bit thin. So I might even just extend it a tiny bit. What I'm actually going to do is extend it to the end, like the widest part of the bottom. And that's just going to make it easier to model the front. And that seems to accurately represent the thickness as well. It kind of looks like this part wraps around and covers all the area for the foot for the most part, just so that this part at the front can come out with a lot more ease. So let's set up our reference again. This should be a good profile shot. I'll put it back. And yeah, now we can sort of dive into it. I will be right back though. It is very, very hot in here. I need to turn the heat down. Okay, that is much, much better. It's Thanksgiving weekend and no one's here, so I just decided to turn the heat up. And that was way too hot. So yeah, it doesn't help when there's like a vent right beside my feet as well. I'm getting way too toasty. So with that out of the way, let's continue making this shape and starting to get things to interact more properly. So let's see exactly how we are going to do this. I think first things first is with this cylinder piece. I'm actually going to delete these two because we're going to end up mirroring them over again once we finish this piece. First thing I'm going to actually have to do is cap this off. So I'm going to select this edge loop and shift select this edge loop. And if I hold shift right click, we can go to bridge. And it's just going to fill that in for us, which is perfect. Yep, that's exactly what we want. And another thing I'm going to do is deselect these feet pieces, or deattach them. So I'm going to select these two, shift right click, and go to extract faces. And it's also occurring to me that I could mirror this so I don't have to do both sides, but this seems to be a bit asymmetrical, so I'm going to just manually do both sides for now, especially since we're going to have to deal with it once we get to this piece up here. But what I want to try and do is do a Boolean to combine these pieces and see how that goes. So I'm going to actually save first. And I recommend you guys save roughly every like 10-15 minutes because when you're doing a project this big, like something terrible is bound to happen, and everyone's been there before where you've lost a ton of work. So Booleans are definitely a great way to destroy your work, by the way. They're generally pretty unstable as far as modeling goes. But we're going to just be doing a union. So just selecting both of these, going to union, and clicking new Boolean operation, clean up, delete history and base objects. And it's going to be decent. Like the way that this is attached seems pretty good. It's just sort of gone ahead and made it into one mesh. So even if we go inside, it's just one piece. Obviously it's not perfect because we're getting stuff like this up here, which I'm going to manually clean up right now. And since I'm manually cleaning up, I might as well cut this in half. So the easiest way to do that would be, let's see, go into the top view. I have my cut tool selected. I'm just going to hold shift and do a perfect slice down the middle. And then holding X, I'm going to move that directly to the grid where I can then select the side and delete it. The reason I'm doing that is because once we start adding in wonky geometry, we can't just put edge loops into things anymore. It's going to like do stuff like this. It just wasn't acting properly, so I decided to cut it that way. But yeah, let's start to fix this. I'm going to start by deleting this face and just holding V to snap these verts to a place where I can sort of close it off. Move these to the middle, and then selecting all of them, holding shift and right click, we can merge vertices and then merge vertices. And the reason we want to do this is so that instead of just having a bunch of verts on top of each other, they're combined into just one vertice, which is way more efficient, way more easier to use. And now we've successfully closed that off. I just want to see if the bottom has any issues, because probably does. I'm just going to re-isolate that. And surprisingly, yeah, there's definitely some issues. It kind of seems like this vert is just resting here when it shouldn't be. So what I'm going to do is, see how this is one big edge? I'm going to add a vert directly beside the other one and then just merge them. So going back to my cut tool, I can just add a vert right here and then say like, I don't know. Oh, I'm going to have to do it over here as well. So I'm going to put it about here. snap this over to this guy and snap this over to this guy. The reason I'm doing this is just because it's a bunch of verts resting on top of each other when they're not actually connected, which means that they can't really interact with each other properly. And even though this is just a block out, I might want to take this specific mesh and move it over to ZBrush later. And if I want to be working with it, it needs to be proper geometry. So I'm just setting this up right now. Once again, going to the cut tool, I'm just going to make sure that all of these are properly connected, just because this is one edge here and it's going directly on top of all these smaller edges, and I don't want that to be the case. I want it all to be one edge. So I'm just going to do that and do that and just make sure I manually place them on top, and then we can merge vertices, and now it should just be one vert and proper and easy to work with. We're gonna have to do it over here as well. And as you can see, when it starts to get kind of complicated like this, it's a lot easier to just mirror things over, so we don't have to do this on both sides. And then just a little bit more cleanup, like this just looks incorrect. I'm gonna merge that, and that seems pretty good. This is probably going to be causing some errors later on, but for now, it should be fine to work with. It's not totally broken like it was before. And this also seems fine. Okay, cool. So, the reason I did that is just in case later on I want to do a bevel, we can just select these edges. And unless it's going to be too tight down at the bottom, we can just, we can start to set up these smooth transitions that we're starting to see here. So yeah, that's really good. It's exactly what we're looking for. This, I'm not entirely sure. We might have to totally chop this off, but for now I'm just going to keep it because I think we need it on the back half. So let's just mirror this guy over. The pivot should be in the middle, but if not, we can just snap it to the middle and mirror it on Z. Yep, so that should be fine. And let's see. We have all this capped off. We do need to add this little ring in here. So it seems like it's on the back side. So if this was the front, it's offset a little bit to the back. One thing that we do have to do when we merge stuff like this is just make sure that our verts are also merged. So selecting those and going back to merge vertices. That way we can delete them and make sure that there's no hidden faces in there. Even though I will be adding an edge loop in here to get this guy. So as you can see, adding an edge loop is kind of skewed, but I'm just going to add one in here anyways. It seems like we're having some sort of issues with our geometry. That doesn't seem proper, but this is super normal. Anytime you do a Boolean, something like this is bound to happen. So I'm just going to start by closing these guys off and seeing if this solves anything. And then obviously doing like a quick merge vertices over everything sometimes solves the problem. And yep, so now we got everything looping around again. We can just select this edge loop and scale it so that it's perfectly straight. And from here, we can start to get that shape a little bit more. Before I do that, I might even want to raise this up a little bit more because this looked a bit thinner. Something along those lines seems a bit more accurate. So yeah, let's grab this. There's a bunch of different ways that we can make this shape. I'm just going to start by trying to like do an extrude and then a bevel. I just want to see how that goes. But first I'm just going to save everything. Cool. So I'm going to hit Control B to bevel this guy. I'm trying to get about the width that this space is, which I think by default it was pretty spot on. Cool. So what we can do then is I just kind of want to move this away from the end a little bit. and not delete it completely, just because I want to make sure everything's even. I'm going to select these two edges and bevel them again, and then we can extrude from these. So we want to make sure that these are about the size and thickness of this part down here. I'm going to try 0.3, 0.35. That seems pretty good. So we can grab these two faces, and holding shift we can just drag down. If you have an older version, you might have to hit Control E or click the extrude button here, but I think this is how it's been for quite a while. Just holding shift and dragging faces should extrude them. I'm just going to bring these guys down about so. I'm going to go back to our cut tool. I'm going to add two cuts in here, and then just selecting the two, we can scale them down on Y to make sure they're totally even. And then from here we can bridge them across, and you can see generally the workflow we're doing. So let's delete these two faces. We're also not going to need these faces here anymore. So let's start by selecting these two open edge loops and shift right clicking and fill hole. And then we're going to do something similar to what we did before, where we select these two edge loops, shift right click, and bridge. And if for some reason that doesn't work, you might just want to manually bridge. Just select like this edge, hit bridge, then this edge. But it shouldn't give you too much trouble. So yeah, this is more or less the shape we're going for. I'm then going to bevel these so they're a lot rounder. An easy way to make sure that our geometry is okay is I'm just going to clean this up a bit, where I just sort of move these edges so they're much easier to work with. I'm just vert snapping them, of course, down and across. Same with this guy, moving them sideways and up. So there's a lot less edges to worry about. And then of course we're gonna have to merge them. Okay, cool. So let's see how this turns out. If I select this loop and I hit Control B, it's definitely not perfect. I think one of the issues is the thickness here seems to be a bit much, so I'm going to scale these faces in. And I also think we're going to need an edge down the middle to make it a bit more rounded. So let's select these three and bevel them. Yeah, definitely not perfect. Let's undo all that. I don't particularly like this guy in the middle here. I also think it's a bit too far down. So I want to move it up a little bit. Yeah, I think that's just the nature of the bevel. I mean, we can change the way that it's beveling. But I don't think it matters too much. I think properly what I should have done is taken a ring and welded it in. I'm just trying to think if that's even worth it for a placeholder at this point. I might as well, because I'm going to be having to use this later on anyways. So let's just delete that face. Selecting these two edge rings and scaling them down. We're going to put a ring from our create polygon primitives pipe. We'll be using a pipe for this guy. So let's just sort of get this roughly how we want it to. I'm just going to the channel box layer editor, polypipe 1. We don't need it to be too round, but since we're only using half, like, feel free to bump it up. 30 should be fine, I guess, for now. And then the radius, we're just going to choose how thin we want it to be. So we can roughly get it into place. I know that Maya kind of freaks out when you move things around too much. Then you try and change the inputs on the side. So I'm just trying not to do too many too many adjustments here. But I think we can work with this. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete the top half. And we can get this into position. Yeah, I'm just being like, okay, this isn't totally flat, but I think that should be fine as long as we scale it. And let's sort of just snap things into place. So holding D, or just pressing D rather, we can get our gizmo, move it to the corner here, and snap that guy up here. I do want to resize this accurately. So before we actually delete anything, I'm just going back. Let's set everything up. Let's see. I'm going to grab these. So these are the middle edges here. I still want to sort of have them flattened, but the reason I brought back the whole ring is because I want to really quickly be able to get the gizmo centered so that I can scale things much easier. So I'm going to move this here, get it in place. I'm going to grab these two edges. Actually, I think the easiest way to do this, and the only reason I'm worrying right now is because I don't want the center of the object when I hit center pivot to change. But I think it should be fine if I collapse these edges into one another. So let's just grab this face, shift right click, and go to... The collapse option should be... right there. Okay, so we don't want to do that. What we want to do is do it on the verts. Edit mesh, collapse. Polygon edge or face must be selected. Interesting. Okay, select an edge, collapse, and then we can hit G to duplicate the last command. So I'm just collapsing it all the way around. This way it's perfectly straight. This can also be avoided if you pick a pipe with a perfect line down the middle, so you can just choose the amount of edges that's totally accurate there. But this also works. So I'm going to now move the pivot to the end here. We could snap it back to where we wanted it to. And I'm just going to scale it and eyeball it so that this side edge is matched up here like it is on this side. So about there, and then we can grab these middle pieces, and this is why I was mainly doing this to get the whole ring, so that we can scale this in and get this side edge to also line up. Perfect. So from here we can just delete the top faces. We can snap these guys here, and we just got to do a little bit of cleanup where we make sure that all of these are perfectly snapped. I'm just holding V and snapping them into place, of course. And it's, so technically this isn't a perfect, it's not perfectly symmetrical, but that's okay for this because one, this is not perfectly symmetrical, and two, it's off by such a tiny, tiny amount that no one would ever actually notice it. So from here we can combine these two pieces, merge the vertices, and that's definitely looking a lot more like that. I do just want to raise it up a little bit. As much as like that. And it even kind of seems like these are stretched out a bit, or it might just be because they're beveled. So we might want to go ahead and do that. And that's starting to look like that shape a bit more. And then just out of habit, I want to clean this up because it looks a little messed up. And merge them. Cool. So we're starting to get the side piece to be quite spot on with how it is. The spacing might be a little bit different. I still might want to come in here and adjust how far everything is. But for the most part, that's looking pretty good. I might even do something like that. It's like, I'm trying to look at the space here, but I know once I add in the bevels, we're going to be getting less space, right? It starts to close in a little bit. So I'm just trying to keep all that in mind. So in that case, we might as well add the bevels in, because even if we don't want them, they're pretty easy to get rid of later on. So just selecting these edges, hitting Control B. We can just sort of change the fraction and how round it is. I don't want to go too crazy with it, because in blockout, you're going to be changing things a lot. So I wouldn't go past like 2 segments usually. But about here, we're starting to get the shape, and this is where I'm starting to realize, like, yeah, it seems like this is definitely more rectangular, while this is almost more of a square shape. So then we can go in, make sure we don't have anything selected we don't want, kind of drag that down. And just take our time sort of getting the shape correctly. There's no rush right now. This is the time to make mistakes, so feel free to take your time and do whatever you need to do. I just have a tickle in my throat, so give me a second. I need to cough for a bit. Okay, cool. Had some water. Right, okay, so let's get out of isolated view. So now we need to see how this all works together. I'm going to be mirroring this guy over. Actually, before that, I'm going to adjust the feet. So let's take this back into isolation. I'm going to delete this foot for now. Center pivot on this guy. Snap it in place. And what's interesting is how we get this to all line up. I think I want it to be a little bit skinnier in general, but I can plump out the top a bit more. So yeah, something like that looks pretty good. And then getting out of isolation mode. Poke face again, and move our pivot back to the middle, and we can mirror that guy over. I guess we're off center a little bit. We're gonna have to realign a little bit here, but I can select these and just quickly snap it into place. So let's combine what we should have together. So one piece, 2, mesh combine. And this is still the center technically, so we can hit D to move that there, freeze our transformations, delete history. This is of course just resetting all of our translates here. Say I move this, it knows how much I've moved it from that original position. And if we don't want that, if we want this to be its original position, we can just freeze transformations and get rid of all of that. Which sometimes symmetry gets messed up when you're using those tools, so that's why I just recommend doing it. And then delete history just to make things go a little bit faster and smoother, and not to carry all that extra baggage of the commands we've done to it so far. So let's mirror this across X. We have both the sides set up. It definitely seems a bit wide, but we won't know until later on when we're continuing with things. So let's take a look at this middle piece and how exactly we want to go about it. I think for now we can just keep it as more or less a placeholder for size, because I don't think there is any metal parts here. Just looking at this, we have the back piece for sure. In the front we have, I don't think we have anything from this box. It's just more or less a guide for us right now. Yeah, I think that's kind of the only purpose it's really serving at the moment. Well, in that case, let's leave that for later on when we have more stuff put together. And let's focus on this sort of front triangular piece. This should be pretty quick and easy to throw together. And it kind of seems like we have an accurate representation of this. So it rounds out and then it's flat in the front. So we can then get these triangular pieces set up out of that. We're not going to be setting up the keys quite yet. I think that's one of the last things we're going to be doing. But the actual metal shape, because we're just trying to set up the case as a whole right now, and then we'll fill it up later. So let's continue. Let's get these pieces in place. Start by just putting a box in. And it kind of seems like it's roughly halfway up here. But it seems like I'm going to have to scale this all a little bit later as we go along. I'm just going to delete this face because I know we're not going to need it. I'm going to press D to move our pivot, snap it here, and just snap it to this face here just so it's flush. We can just sort of get it roughly into position for now. I think it should just mainly be level with the this flat part here, and the quickest way to do that would once again be poke face, snap it to the middle, and then we know it's lined up, and we can just delete these edges again. Control backspace to make sure we delete any verts that are attached to it. And let's just try and get a feel for the thickness on this guy. So it doesn't seem too thick. It seems rather thin, actually. For the sake of this, I'm just going to make it the width here. That seems too thick. So let's just centering the pivot and scaling down a bit, just to make room for like welding later on. It seems like it's about yay thick. And of course we can go ahead and fix all this later. So let's look at where it's lined up. It seems like, of course, the bottom is lined up at the bottom, which makes sense. And then the top is about halfway up. So it seems like it's about there. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and add a... Is there anything that we can use as kind of like a halfway marker? Not really. We might have to make our own. A quick way to do that would be by dropping in a plane. I'm just going to scale this up and get rid of all the subdivisions and rotate it. And what I'm doing is kind of just making like a makeshift ruler. So I want something that shows me exactly where halfway up this is. So I'm going to grab this edge and snap it to the top. Grab this edge and snap it to the bottom. And now when I go and I poke this face, I know that this is right in the middle. Doing like these makeshift rulers are super important, just for getting things really quickly accurate and getting them exact. So now when I snap this, I know it's exactly halfway up, which is how it seems to be in the reference. So Cool, cool. Actually, what I want to do to make sure that's correct is get the top of this exactly halfway up. And then grab the bottom and move it to the bottom. And this is where we're going to start to have a few issues just based on how I set this up. But as far as placeholder goes, it's fine. Because as you can see in the reference, it's like welded into this, which we can deal with later. For now, I think as a placeholder, like it's totally fine to have this current setup. And then let's extrude this. I'm trying to get a gauge for exactly how far out this is. It's not as big as this, maybe like 2/3 as wide. I'm going to delete this, it's distracting. This is why if you can find more accurate measurements online, that's super important, but I couldn't quite find any. So I think about there is fine. And I'm going to add in an edge loop. This is just so that I can grab this edge here and start to match the shape a little bit better. Sorry, grab this face here. And this might help us get a better idea as to how far out we should pull this. I'm just trying to match the shape right now. There's not too much I can comment on other than just eyeballing it and trying to make it look accurate. So I do want to raise this a bit, and it does kind of seem like this is a bit further back, with this extending a little further. I even want to say that this looks like it's a bit lower now that I'm looking at it. I feel like this is much more accurate. And it is something to note that this part is actually hovering, like it's floating, so I don't have to get it to touch the ground or anything. And I'm just sort of fudging with it a little bit, so like I said, there's not a ton I can comment on other than just try and get this part accurate if you can. Actually, I have an idea for this, to have it flush at the side here so it rounds out into it. It might make this part a lot easier to deal with, and it makes this transition a lot better. And it even gives me a little bit of wiggle room to rescale it a bit. Okay, I think as far as shape and size goes, that's pretty accurate. I kind of want to lower that a bit, but at this point, like, I could just push and pull this all day. This works for now. Let's start to cut out this triangle shape. This should be pretty quick and easy. I'm just going to grab both of these sides here and hit Control E to extrude, and then we can just use this offset slider to sort of put it in. Let's go with that for now. And I just want to merge this stuff here, or we can collapse it, which we found under Edit Mesh, Collapse. And once again, G is to repeat the last command, so I'm just hitting G to recollapse it. I'm going to select these two verts and vertex snap them down so they're flush with this guy here. And from here we can kind of rescale and make everything a bit more accurate. It seems like there's a lot more space at the bottom here. So I'm going to scale it up, move it up. To me, it kind of seems like this is a bit lower and then it gradually gets higher. So I'm just kind of recreate that. I don't want it to be flush or anything, so Something like that seems pretty good. So we can just delete those, select this edge loop, shift right click bridge, and we got that. I might actually change that a little bit more. I kind of want to scale it down and give the top a bit more breathing room. Okay, so we can just bridge them over again. That looks a bit more accurate. And then let's just get a nice quick bevel in there, just to match the overall shape language a bit more. Cool. I'm going to merge these because this just looks like really bad topology. Merge to center. Select these guys and hit G to repeat last command. Cool, so that's how it should be. Let's get this guy to the other side, so I'm just going to duplicate it, and I know it's flush on this side, so a really quick way to to get it over is just move the pivot, snap it where it should be, and it's symmetrical on both sides now. Cool, cool. Let's get a front shot of this guy that we can work with. Yeah, so this is a pretty good one. It just kind of seems like it goes across, dips, and then comes back up. So that should be pretty quick to throw together. Let's just add some cuts where we find fit. I could have cut this before I sent it over, but it should be quick to just sort of get it the same on both sides. So based on how thick this is, I'm just trying to get an accurate cut in there. About there, and then of course we can fix all this later. Just want to get everything in place first. So I'm just grabbing this edge loop and snapping it to make sure that they're level. Let's combine these guys. Mesh combine. And select these two faces. Delete them. And as you can see, some of these techniques are getting pretty familiar. Select this edge loop. Select this edge loop. Shift right click. Bridge. So the thickness seems a bit too thick. I'm just gonna scale it in a little. And then clean this up since we're at it. Cool, cool. Merge those verts together. And then to make the dip, obviously this is really quite easy. I'm gonna excuse me. I'm gonna add an edge loop in the middle. Yeah, everything is definitely off center. I'm gonna have to fix that up really quick after. I can control B to bevel this. I can just sort of change where I want the edges to be by changing the fraction, which is cool. And then from here, all I really have to do is bevel these guys again, control B, but turn this way down, maybe to like 0.05, and then just grab this face and pull it down a little bit. About there. And then if I want to change the relief and make it a bit of a smoother transition, just gotta scale these guys in a little bit. And we're already starting to get the main gist of the shape here. Like if I delete this, like we're just getting the shell done right now, and the shell definitely is coming together for the most part, because if you guys remember how I had this set up, the red doesn't even include this front part. This front part seems like it's like a plastic piece that's bolted on afterwards. So the red, what it does is it travels around the back, We do have to get these pieces up here, and we have to get this piece that extends out the side, and then the connection piece on the back and this little nub. But that should be pretty much the rest of the shell. Let's just get this connection piece on the back really quick, because I know it's going to take about 2 seconds to do. It's just going to match this width here. So let's throw in a box. Scale this guy up. I'm just going to delete the ends because they're going to be jammed into the side anyways. Scale it down. All we have to do is grab the top face and snap it to the height and the bottom part. And I also want to make sure the width is correct as well. So I'm just going to rotate, snap, and just pressing F to frame and get it in the center, and then holding V once again to snap. Oh. But yeah, now going back into object mode, we know that this is the exact same. And we can rotate. If you're wondering how I'm getting it to not just rotate smoothly, but like get it to snap on 15-degree increments, I'm just holding J when I'm clicking and dragging to rotate. So that's a good tip whenever you're trying to keep things accurate and on a good clean rotation. Okay, so let's just snap this here like we've done with everything else. And drag it across. And this is where I'm going to even... I'm going to start to use layers a bit. So I'm going to add a layer just in the channel box / layer editor. I'm going to call this just like hidden, and hit save. And I'm just going to add this middle box. And the way that you do that is right click it, add selected objects. Now we can just turn it on and off, just so I can quickly see if what we're working with is accurate. Yep, just because I want to see how accurate we are to the reference here. The height is definitely accurate. Something I didn't realize, actually, which is kind of cool, is this middle piece sort of goes up. It juts up a little bit, which is easy. It's kind of the opposite of what we did in the front. So just added an edge loop, select it, bevel it to the size that we want, which seems about maybe a little bit smaller than that, like 0.275 for me. Yeah, and of course it's easy to change. Then all I have to do is just grab this face, holding shift, drag up, and now we have this little slightly raised piece. It even looks like it might be tapered in a little bit. Yep, so that's really a quick way to throw that together. We have all this other stuff going on in the back, like this winding part. I kind of want to just throw together this piece really quickly, and then I might pause and continue this in the next chapter. So yeah, let's just quickly make this last piece, and then I'm going to take a bit of a break, and we can continue with the rest of it. But yeah, this shouldn't be too hard to throw together. Going to create polygon primitive cube. Scale this guy up. We know we're not going to be using the sides, so we might as well delete that guy. And we're definitely going to have to skinny this guy out a little bit as well. Get the size a bit more accurate. And then by moving our pivot to the corner with our vertex snap, we can just snap this directly to the side. It seems flush, so let's get that level. This is also like a little bit higher than halfway up. And we can scale this like so. It's definitely wider at the bottom. This is probably going to be one of those things that I'll revisit and mess around with. But this is just something that, based on the image that we have, like, this is the only way we can see it. Like, we have other reference of it, but it's just a really thin piece of metal. I can like roughly trying to recreate it, extruding out from here. This definitely seems like a different piece on top, but we don't need to worry about that for our placeholder yet. So I'm just going to pull it out, grab these two edges, and Control B, and we're just going to bevel this guy so it's nice and round. It's not quite right. I'm going to pull this in a little bit, and it just seems like I'm going to have to, where are we? Grab this face and bring it down a little bit more. I might also want to scale this up a little bit. And then bring this up a little bit as well. Yeah, that's pretty good for a placeholder. When we revisit it, we'll be setting it up like we did in the demonstration video, where I'll actually make this part and this part a different mesh, and the bevels will be much easier that way. But this is a pretty good representation. Like, with placeholders, we just want it to be like, hey, I can quickly grab this and turn it into what I'm looking at in the reference, because it's accurately sized. Like, we're not trying to even set it up yet for ZBrush or anything. So let's just make sure the height is about where it should be. I could probably raise it a little. I also kind of feel like I could scrunch it in a bit more. But yeah, we kind of have the main frame mostly complete. Like I said, these side parts are going to be the next challenge. And then from there we can start, you know, filling in the front, getting the green part sort of set into place, start tackling the top, and then filling in the guts of it. But this is definitely a good start. From here, since this is kind of like the foundation of everything, it's going to be easier to build around it. So hopefully this sort of clarifies a little bit how you'd start on something like this. And of course, we're going to go through the rest of the block out. So yeah, thank you guys for watching this chapter. Hopefully you did learn something from this one, but we're just going to be continuing on right away. And yeah, I will see you in part 2 of the block out. So I'll talk to you guys in just a minute. See ya.